Hello, my name is John Fisher, and this is Murder in Hawaii. Sometimes we just give up. We just give up. We've heard so much lying from everybody. The president lies, Congress lies, local politicians send out confusing, contradictory information. We don't know what to do. We keep looking for answers, for direction, for guidance, for instruction in the storm, for guidance in the crisis. It seems to be there, but then it turns out to be wrong, or it's contradictory, or somebody else says something different, and we don't know what to do. We ask the Lord to give us guidance, but we're frustrated. We're frustrated with our institutions and the ability of those institutions to guide us, to help us, to show us the way. But then we begin to believe. We begin to look into ourselves, and we discover that belief comes not from the outside. That's not where truth is going to come from. It's going to come from us, from inside us, from our own belief in ourselves. And we'll take that information, however contradictory, however complicated, and we'll sift it, and we'll make decisions based on our belief in ourselves and our ability to decide. I'm not religious, not in any traditional sense, but I do believe in the belief in self. And if we can take that belief as a plead, as a desperate ask, and ask it what to do, and take this information and send it out into the world as a decision, we'll have found the only belief there is, a belief in self, which will extend, which will blossom out into a world of decision, and maybe even we will find that we can lead and inspire. One of my favorite movies growing up was The Verdict, a movie about an attorney. I love this movie. And the reason I loved it was I thought it would tell me something about my father. You see, I loved my father. He was an incredible man. He wore a suit every day of his life. Here he is, my father. He was an attorney. That's why I love The Verdict so much, because I thought this movie would tell me something about my father and his profession. I knew so little about it. Look at him with that benign smile. He was a benevolent man. He was kind. He was clever. He was witty. He was so funny, so charming. He could walk in a room and everybody wanted to talk to him because he was such a laid-back, charming, friendly guy. I loved him. And I always wanted to know about his profession. So I wore a suit tonight. This is the suit that I bought for his funeral in 2005. I was heartbroken when he died, and I thought it would be a fitting tribute if I went to Brooks Brothers, where he bought all of his suits and bought a brand new suit and wore it to his funeral. And I also took a copy of The Caine Mutiny and read from it at his eulogy. That was his favorite book. It had everything in it that he loved in the world. The Second World War, the US Navy. He'd fought in the Navy in the Second World War. And it also had a trial, a big trial at the end of it. And that's what he was all about, trials, being an attorney. He was a very successful attorney, very successful. And he built this big, beautiful house for us in Ross, California, in this wonderfully affluent community. And we were raised amongst affluent people in a safe, wonderful environment. And this house was spectacular. It was incredible. It was a big, old colonial house in the redwood trees of Ross. Here's a picture of it, under construction. Look at that. Those big pillars, those came from Georgia. They came from Georgia on a flatbed truck all the way across the country to be put up in Ross, California, out in the redwood trees. You see the redwoods behind there? That's it being built. That was my mother's dream, a colonial house, a southern mansion in the redwood trees. Here's another picture of it when it was torn down. Yes, Just before it was torn down, they had this beautiful watercolor painting made of it. Yes, this house that they were so proud of. Look at it. Look at it. Look at it. Yes, the colonial mansion, the southern mansion in the redwood trees. And then it disappeared. A guy bought it just for the property. That's all he wanted. And his dream house was not a southern mansion. His dream house was a Bavarian hunting lodge. So he built a huge Bavarian hunting lodge right there on the same foundation in Ross, California, in Marin County. I love that house. It was incredible. It had this long driveway up to it that gave us complete isolation. And one day, a friend of my little brother's came up the driveway in his car and he parked in front of the house. And there was my mother in the patio off to the side. She was reclining, sipping an iced tea, and she waved to my brother's friend. And my brother's friend said to him, I said, does your mother have a Scarlett O'Hara complex? I think she did. I think that's what she wanted. She wanted Tara. That's what she wanted her husband to build for her. And he could do it because he was an incredibly successful attorney, this charming, wonderful man who always wore a suit. Look at him. Look at him in his uniform. That's what I wore tonight, the uniform of an attorney, just like my father. But here's the thing. He never talked about what he did in court. He never talked about being an attorney. He never said a word about it. He never talked about his life at the firm in San Francisco, about arguing a case. He never talked about it. And I always wondered why. I used to ask him, I said, why don't you talk about work? And he'd say something like, well, you should never talk about money with the kids. What? What an attorney's answer. He didn't answer my question. He answered the question that he wanted to answer. He changed the subject to money. I didn't ask him about money. I asked him to talk about the law, about arguing a case. Well, you should never talk about money with the kids. Phooey. I stopped asking. He was a great guy. That's all I cared about. And here's one thing I did know about him, and this suggested why he became an attorney, is he loved to debate. He loved to argue about stuff, friendly argument, but he loved to debate stuff, loved to. And he would take any position. The more perverse, strange, off position, he would take it just because he loved the action of a debate and trying to convince something of something that they knew wasn't right. My older brother would say something like, the world is round. He'd say, no, it's not, it's flat. My brother said, that's ridiculous. Science tells us it's round. You look at a globe, it's round. Come on, the world's round. You know that. He said, no, it's flat. My father would say, no, it's flat. It's flat. Look at the horizon. You see the horizon over there? Do you see it over there? Yeah, that's the horizon. Everything between us and the horizon is flat. Doesn't look round to me. That's all that matters, Peter. That's all that matters is the flatness in front of us. Don't worry about some round globe down at the school library. Look what's in front of you. It's flat. Only worry about that. He was wonderful at that, and he loved to debate, endless debate. You said yes, he said no. You said right, he said wrong, just for the fun of it. And his debating was obviously so good that he made enough money to build us this wonderful house in this affluent community. Here's the weird thing, though. I was never happy in that house. I just wasn't happy in that house. I don't know why. I just never was growing up. I wonder about that. I think maybe it might have been because I was gay. Maybe that was it. But I don't know. I mean, there were no gay people around. It was an affluent community. Nobody ever teased me. Rich kids don't care about any other kids. You have to care about other kids to tease them. Rich kids don't care. They just care about themselves. There was never any teasing. Nobody ever made fun of me. I never saw another gay person. I didn't even know there was anything wrong with being gay. I didn't even know I was gay. I was pre-gay. So I don't think that was it. I had really unconventional interests. That might be it. I like to read things and watch movies and then go out into the huge backyard and recreate them. Battle scenes and kings and all sorts of debates, sometimes even courtroom dramas. I like to recreate them out in the woods. I didn't need anybody to do that. It was much more fun because I knew everything, right? I knew everything that was going on with my characters. I didn't need anybody to help me. I had unconventional interests. Maybe it was because I was non-athletic, but I don't think that was it. As soon as I realized I was no good at sports, I just stopped playing them. That's the only reason that people ever hate you about sports is if you're bad at them and you keep playing. That's when you get teased. The other kids are like, get off the field. I got off the field. They were grateful. They said, thank you. I was a hero. I got off the field. And maybe it was just because that driveway was too long. That other kids didn't want to come up that long, steep driveway all the way to the top just to see me. Or maybe more likely it was because I was too lazy to walk down that driveway because I knew I'd have to come back at the end of the evening. But for whatever reason, I wasn't happy in that house. But it wasn't horrible. The family used to joke that I wasn't unhappy, I was just full of ennui. That was my feeling, ennui. It wasn't angst. It wasn't existential angst. It was ennui, tristesse. It was just a little sadness. That's just the way I was. Fortunately, I created my own world, and that made me happy. I'd go outside the house, and then I was happy because I created my own little world where I enacted everything, and I didn't need anybody. And a great thing happened was I got to high school and there was theater. They had a theater department. I no longer had to do all this stuff on my own. I could do it with other people. Yeah, I loved it. I love the theater department, the energy of the theater department, the excitement of being on stage with other people, enacting all these wonderful things. And I started reading plays. I was a late reader. I was not a reader. I wasn't reading. My parents were worried. But when I got to high school and I discovered the drama department, I started reading plays. I found something I liked to read. And I read Shakespeare and Neil Simon. Why? Because everybody was always arguing in these things. There was always a debate. The kings in Shakespeare, the married couples in Neil Simon, they're always debating, like a courtroom, like my father. They loved to debate. They were sarcastic. They were witty. They were charming, but they were always debating. And I love Shakespeare and Neil Simon, my two favorites. But then I discovered a genre of plays that was not defined by one playwright. It was a whole separate genre of plays. And those were courtroom dramas. Courtroom dramas based on historical events. I thought, yay, yippee! I found something I love to read. And that was probably my father's attorney genes in me coming out. I mean, these courtroom dramas were great and they were based on historical events. I loved history. From movies and books, I learned about history. From Shakespeare, I learned about history. And now here were plays that were all about trials and history. It's like the Cane Mutiny for my father. It was about history, World War II, and trials. This combined everything that I loved. And I discovered some wonderful historical courtroom dramas. I discovered the Andersonville trial, all about that evil Confederate prison camp and the man who ran it, and his war crimes trial after the war. Amazing. I was turning pages. I discovered the Cane Mutiny court-martial. I didn't even know this. I knew my father loved this book. I knew he loved the movie, but I didn't even know there was a play, the Cane Mutiny court-martial. It was just the court-martial, and that is the best part of the book. I never even read the book. I read the book last year for the first time. It is the best book ever, but the best part of it, the best part of it is the courtroom scenes at the end, the last third. It's amazing. And that's what I discovered in high school, the Cane Mutiny court-martial. To Kill a Mockingbird was a play. People don't know that. They know about the movie, they know about the book, of course, but there's a play, To Kill a Mockingbird, and it all takes place in the court, and you meet all those wonderful characters in the courtroom scene. And the best of all of them, the best, the one I love the most of all because of the lead character was Inherit the Wind. This amazing play about the Scopes monkey trial. It was written by Jerome Lawrence and Robert E. Lee. I couldn't believe that. A playwright who'd taken the name of a Confederate general. Why? It was great. I opened this up, and this is the play. This is the thing. This is the moment that introduced me to the greatest American attorney of all time, Clarence Darrow. I fell in love with this guy. And I thought, since my father never talked about law, that he could teach me about law. He could teach me about what a case was, what a defense was, what a liberal attorney thought like, how he fought to win the rights of people. And this play is incredible. It's an amazing play. And I had to do a duologue in my drama class. You know what a monologue is? It's like what I'm doing now. It's like where one person talks, one character talks. A duologue is where two characters talk and one actor plays them. So you talk to yourself, you talk to yourself, you talk to yourself, you talk to yourself as two characters. So that was given my assignment. I was given that assignment, a duologue, and I chose the big scene from Inherit the Wind, this amazing play about Clarence Darrow. Now, the Scopes monkey trial was fascinating because in the South, you couldn't teach evolution. You couldn't teach that man was evolved from apes. People didn't like that. They didn't like to think that we came from apes. They didn't like that. You could only teach the Bible, creation. God created man. He created the earth, created man. That's the only thing you could teach. And if you taught evolution, you could be thrown in jail. Well, Scopes taught evolution in the South. He taught that man came from apes, and they put him on trial because he'd broken the law. And Clarence Darrow was his defense attorney, and he went down south into that heat, and he argued this incredible case. And his opponent was William Jennings Bryan, who was a great orator on the Bible and a presidential candidate. So a smart man in his own right. And Darrow had to prove to the jury that man was evolved from apes. Now, the first challenge he had to meet was he had to show that there was enough time for evolution, because the Bible, according to people like Bryant, said that the earth was only 4,004 years old. That's what Bryant said. He said, Bishop Ussher has determined that the earth is only 4,004 years old. So not only do we not want to be descended from apes, but there's no time for us to be descended from apes because we've only been around for 4,004 years. So Darrow put him on the stand. And he said to him, so the world is only 4,004 years old. Is that right? Yes, that's right. That's what Brian said. Yes, that's right. So then Darrow said, 4,004 years old. And the world was created in 7 days, right? Is that correct? Well, 6 days. The Lord rested on the seventh day. Oh, yeah, I forgot. My mistake. The seventh day. Yeah, that's Sunday, right? When the rest of us are supposed to rest, right? In emulation of the Lord. Yeah, that's right. It took him 6 days to create the world. Yes, that's right. 6 days. And those first 3 days, there wasn't any sun those first 3 days. I mean, the sun wasn't in the sky yet, because that was created on the fourth day. So how long were those days, those first 3 days? I don't understand the question. Well, I mean, there was no sun, so were they 24-hour days? I still don't understand the question. Well, okay. Since there was no sun, did they necessarily have to be 24 hours? Couldn't they be like 25 hours? Could those days have been 25 hours long, each of them? Yes, it's possible. Could they have been 26 hours? I mean, there was no sun. Could they have been 26? Yes, it's possible. Could they have been 27 hours? Or 40 hours? Or 10 months? Or 10 years? Or 10 million years? He used logic to break down Bryant, to find even in scripture the possibility that there were millions of years in which man could evolve. I love that scene. I thought it was amazing. The dialectic, the sarcasm. I loved it. It was incredible. And I discovered another play about him. Clarence Darrow for the defense. It was a one-man show, and it talked about all of his cases, all of his wonderful cases, where he always fought for the underdog. He always fought for the little man. He always fought for the dispossessed, for the minorities. He fought for the people who didn't normally get great representation because they were taking on the power, the elite, the industrialists, the rich, the religious powerful. He fought for the underdog, for the little man, and he always fought against the death penalty. He always thought that human life was sacrosanct. These were his core beliefs, the underdog, equality amongst all people, including the races. And life is sacrosanct. I thought I knew all of his cases, Leopold and Loeb, Ossian Sweet. I thought I knew all of his cases. But in 2001, a movie came out, Pearl Harbor. This is going to be the big movie of the summer. And all the media was involved in promoting this movie. And I was so excited because it was about World War II, which I loved. And I wanted to see this movie so bad. And the networks were covering it. It was being covered online. It was being covered in all the newspapers. And even the snooty New Yorker magazine wrote a big article about it. And they got John Gregory Dunn to write the article. And it was called The American Raj, Pearl Harbor as Metaphor, the Annals of Empire. And it was about this case I had never heard of, this notorious case from the 1930s. It was called the Massie trial, this horrible case in which a white woman, the wife of a white naval officer, was allegedly raped by 5 Hawaiians, non-whites. Outrageous. And the country was up in arms because the country at the time was racist. It could not tolerate this. And I was shocked to see that my hero, Clarence Darrow, was actually involved in this case. And it was a huge case, and I'd never even heard of it. So I picked up this article, and I was so excited to read it. So excited to read about this case that I never knew that Clarence Darrow was involved in. And in the article, John Gregory Dunn said the best way to understand this case, the Massie trial, is race. It was all about race. The white Navy, the all-white U.S. Navy stationed in Honolulu versus the Hawaiians. non-whites. It was all about race conflict in the United States. That was the best way to understand it. So in fact, to Clarence Darrow's earlier case, where he explained race to me, it was this case of Dr. Ossian Sweet. Ossian Sweet, a horrible case, horrible. He was an African-American man in Detroit, and he bought a house for his family of 11 in a white neighborhood. His white neighbors did not like that. They did not like it. They surrounded the house. They started protesting him being there. They started shouting at the house. And then his brother came home from work and was pushing through the crowd, and the crowd turned on him and started to beat him. And then they started throwing rocks at Ossian Sweet's house, throwing rocks at this doctor's house, throwing rocks. And his brother ran in. He threw the door open so his brother could get in. And then the white mob charged the house. And Ossian Sweet thought, oh my God, it's a lynch mob. They're going to get my whole family. So he took out a gun and he fired it into the crowd. And he killed one white man, one of the men charging the house. And the crowd dissipated. And then he was charged with first-degree murder because he'd killed this one white man. And Clarence Darrow thought it was outrageous that this man defending his home was now being tried for first-degree murder. And he said, race. It's all about prejudice and race. And he said, I insist that there is nothing but prejudice in this case. That if it was reversed and 11 white men had shot and killed a black man while protecting their home and their lives against a black mob, nobody would have dreamed of having them indicted. They would have been given medals instead. So I thought, well, this is the man who defended and exonerated Dr. Ossian Sweet. This was the man to defend the alleged rapists in this outrageous case, the Massie case in Hawaii in 1931. So what happened? What happened in this case? It's very complicated, but easy to understand, actually. What happened? Talia Fortescue was a young lady. She was 16 years old, and she married Tommy Massie, a young lieutenant in the United States Navy. He was in the submarines. She was a society girl. She had the high life. She lived back east, and they were married in the National Cathedral in Washington, D.C. Big wedding. And then they went to Honolulu, where he was based, where his submarine division was based, and they went out to Honolulu, and they weren't happy there. They were incompatible. Talia had a drinking problem when she was 16, but they thought the marriage would work. They seemed compatible, but when they got to Hawaii, they were incompatible. She didn't like his friends. She didn't like being a Navy wife. She was argumentative. She was difficult. It was not a happy marriage. And there was so much tension between them that Tommy Massie said to his wife, Thalia, he said, if you don't shape up, I will divorce you. So she had this sword of Damocles hanging over her head. She might get a divorce. And she was so young. One Saturday night, they went out. It was September 12th, 1931. They went to a club. It was nighttime. There was liquor at this club. They had drinks. They were enjoying themselves. But then something happened. Nobody was quite sure what. But a lieutenant commander in the Navy said something to Talia that upset her. And she said, you are no gentleman. And she slapped him. And he leaned over and he said, and you are a louse. And she walked away. Well, Tommy was used to this behavior from Talia, and his friends were too, so they didn't really care that she walked away. They were going to go have their own fun. But as it turned out, she left the party. She left the club, and she walked out into the night, although nobody knew it. Later, a white family was driving through Honolulu, and they saw Talia on the side of the road, waving frantically, waving. They pulled over. Talia walked up to the car. She leaned into the car. She said, are you white people? They said, yes. She got in the car. She slammed the door. She said, take me home. They said, what happened to you? They could see that she'd been punched. They could see scratches. They could see these things. They said, what happened to you? She said, I was abducted and I was beaten. They said, by who? She said, I don't know. I couldn't see them, but they were Hawaiians. They said, how do you know that? She said, because I know Hawaiian voices. They said, what did the car look like? She said, I don't know. It was too dark. I didn't see. What did they look like? She said, I don't know. It was too dark. I couldn't see. They said, did you get the license plate? She said, no, it was too dark. I could not see. Please take me home. Please take me home. This family drove her home. Finally, Tommy, her husband at the party, was finally ready to leave. So he left the party with his friend Jerry. But before he left, he looked for Thalia. He couldn't find her. She was nowhere at the club. They decided to go to another party. When they got there, they called home. They called home to Talia, but she wasn't home. She didn't answer. They waited some time. They had some drinks. They called again. Talia didn't answer. They called again, and finally, Talia answered. Tommy said, "Where are you? I've been looking all over for you." Talia said, "Come home. Come home right now, please. Something terrible has happened." Tommy was in shock. He rushed home. When he got there, he saw Talia. She told him that she had been gang raped by 5 or 6 guys. Hawaiians, she was convinced. They abducted her in their car. They took her out to Ala Moana. They took her into the woods and they raped her, gang raped her repeatedly. Tommy was in shock. He says, "I have to call the police." She said, no, don't call the police. Don't call the police. "No, I have to call the police." She said, no, I can't identify them. And he said, "But you said they were Hawaiian. Didn't you say Hawaiian?" He said, "Yeah, but I don't know what they look like." He said, "Why not?" I said, "Well, I couldn't see. It was too dark." "What the car looked like?" "I couldn't see." What was the license plate?" "I couldn't see. Don't call. She begged him not to call. He called the police. Meanwhile, on the other side of town, coincidentally, a group of Hawaiian guys, actually, there was a Japanese guy, a Chinese guy. They were not pure Hawaiian. It was a mixed group, but non-white. Were in a car driving around, and they almost got into an accident with a Hawaiian woman. Everybody jumped out of the 2 cars and started shouting at each other. The Hawaiian woman grabbed one of these Hawaiian guys from the car by the neck, and he hit her hard, smacked her. Then the Hawaiian woman's husband got out of the car with a tire iron, and Joe decided, "I gotta get out of here." So he got back in the car. The car was driven by Horace Ida, a Japanese kid. It was his car. The 5 guys got back in the car and took off. Well, this Hawaiian woman went to the police department. She said, "I want these guys busted. I can identify them. I can identify the car, the license plate. I want you to pick them up." They punched me. They almost ran me down, and then they punched me. At this point, the police had been to Tommy and Talia's. They've heard about the gang rape by Hawaiians. And now they had a woman reporting that a bunch of Hawaiian guys in the car had slugged her. The police decided it was the same guys in the same car. That was the police decision. It had to be, in their view, it had to be the same guys. So, the police have made a decision. They arrest these guys. And now there's going to be a trial. Evidence. Now, I told you my father never talked about law. He never talked about the courts. He never talked about what he did at work. But he always said certain things. Certain things slipped out. They slipped out of him. And I knew how to trick them out of him, because I would ask him a question about something that had nothing to do with him, just with like a movie I saw. And then he'd tell me, and I told him I loved the verdict. I loved it. He said, "Yeah, that was a good movie, but no." I said, "What do you mean no?" He said, "Well, there's no evidence. Frank Galvin, the hero attorney, he didn't have any evidence. His one good witness was this star doctor who disappeared. The defense bought him. They sent him off to the Bahamas. He disappeared. He didn't have his witness. He had no evidence. If you don't have evidence, the judge isn't going to let the case come to trial. He'll say no. He'll throw it out." And Frank Galvin had no evidence. He was hoping to sweat a confession out of one of the defense witnesses. And finally, he got a rebuttal witness, but nobody knew that. He had no evidence. You can't have a case without evidence. So what evidence, based on what my father said, what evidence, and was it strong, was there in the Massie case? Well, Talia had said she can't identify these guys. It was too dark. So what did the cops do? Did they take her to a lineup and show her a whole bunch of guys and have her pick them out the lineup? No, they brought all 5 of these guys, these young men, to Talia's house, and they said, "Are these the guys?" And she said yes. She said she couldn't identify the car. It was too dark. So what did they do? They took her outside and showed her the car, Horace Ida's car, the car that these 5 guys had been in. They said, "Is that the car?" And she said, "Yes, that's it." She said she didn't know the license number, the license plate. She didn't know it because it was too dark. But all night long at Talia's house, she could hear the police radio giving the license plate of Horace Ida's car. And also, she overheard police officers talking about the license plate number. She heard it at least 6 times. And finally, as the evening went on, she said, I remember the license plate. Yes, I do know it. And she gave them the exact same license plate number that she'd heard on the radio and heard the cops talking about in her house. They told her she had to have an examination. She'd been raped. She had to have a physical examination. For her own safety, she had to have an examination. She became hysterical. She said, I don't want one. I don't want one. She freaked out. She freaked out. They said, you have to. Finally, Tommy convinced her that she had to have an examination. She was taken to see a county doctor. He determined that she could not possibly have been raped. There was no evidence of trauma in the vaginal area. There was no semen or blood anywhere on her body or on her dress. Her dress looked brand new. He said that she was clean as a pin. There was no evidence of rape, gang rape, or anything. The Navy didn't trust him. They sent their own doctor, a lieutenant commander, a doctor from the US Navy, a white doctor. He said the same thing. He examined the clothing of the accused, the 5 guys. He said there was no evidence on their clothing or their bodies of a struggle, of a rape. There was no blood, there was no semen, nothing. Everybody was clean. There was no possibility that she could have been raped. None. This lieutenant commander went to Tommy, and as one officer to another, he said, do you really want to press charges? Do you really? There's no evidence that she was raped. The history of the couple was not conducive to a good prosecution. She had been unfaithful to him. At least there have been a lot of rumors about it. Talia had been unfaithful to Tommy when he was out on cruises with his submarine. Also, he had beat her up. He had beat her. The police knew the address because they'd been there before, because they'd come over because Tommy was beating Talia. And something very interesting, the people in the car who had picked her up, they said she'd only been hit once and some scratches. But when the police got to see her, there was a lot more evidence of a beating. Now, lest this sound like I'm condemning the victim, victimizing the victim, evidence emerged in the course of the trial that threw great doubt onto a lot of what Talia said. So we have 4 non-white Hawaiians who are desperate because now they're going to be brought to trial for raping a white woman, and the whole country was up in arms about this. Grace Fortescue, Talia's mother, arrives from the East Coast. She arrives on a steamship. The admiral of the 14th Naval District, the commander of the entire naval district in which Hawaii resides, the commander of all the military personnel on Hawaii, met her at the boat. This is a man who referred to non-whites as savages, brutes. He hated Hawaiians. He hated them. He thought they were subhuman. He met Thalia's mother at the boat. She got off the boat. She was very cold to him. He said, well, don't worry, the trial begins on Monday. And she said, the trial? Trial? He said, it's just a formality. It's just something that the local government has to do to appease the natives. Don't worry about it. It's fixed. Don't worry about it. The rapists will be found guilty. Well, the rapists weren't just going to wander into court. They wanted the best defense they could get. Money was raised. And they also went to Princess Kawa Nanakua, a princess of the Hawaiian dynasty. She was no longer in power, but she had a lot of money. And they told her what had happened, and she gave them everything she could. And they hired the best defense attorney in the islands. His name was Heen. They had a great attorney. The prosecutor would be Assistant County Attorney Griffith White. That was his name, White. And he was very inexperienced. And Admiral Sterling was very upset about this. He was very upset about this. So he went to see the territorial governor, Lawrence Judd. And he said, this is unacceptable. This prosecutor is too young. He's too inexperienced. He's not going to get the verdict that we have to get. We have to find these guys guilty. We have to. And Judd said, calm down. It'll be fine. This guy's, he's good. He's a good attorney. He's good. Sterling was up in arms. He was furious. He said, we better win this case. You better win it. And if you don't, and he walked to the window of Governor Judd's office, and he looked out the window, he said, if you don't, I cannot be responsible for the actions of my men. It was an unveiled threat. If Judd could not deliver a conviction for this heinous crime visited upon a white woman by these Hawaiians, Sterling was saying he would unleash the United States Navy on Honolulu. So the case, the territory of Hawaii versus Ana Puelo et al., the 5 defendants. Now, I'm reading this, I'm like, well, wait a minute, where does Clarence Darrow come into all this? He's not one of the attorneys. I didn't understand. I was confused. I naturally thought he'd be the defense attorney, that he would stand up for for the underdog. But he was not even mentioned anymore, just at the beginning, not in the body of the article. I told you my father had a few things that he would let slip, and I asked him about the Moscone Milk verdict, when Dan White killed Supervisor Milk and Mayor Moscone. He shot them in cold-blooded murder, and yet he almost got off. He was given a very light sentence. And I said, my father, how is that possible? He was so obviously guilty. He was caught red-handed. How did he get away with it? And my father said, it's about jury selection. If you've got evidence, you also have to be very careful during jury selection. And that's how they got him off. Now, you see, the attorneys in that case, Moscone Milk, thought that they were getting a very eclectic, very representative group of San Franciscans, good citizens. But what the defense realized was he was also getting a law and order jury, that these people on this jury believed in law and order. And Dan White, the perpetrator, was an ex-cop, and there was no way that they were going to find him guilty of first-degree murder and send him into prison for life. No way, because he was an ex-cop. So they gave him a light sentence, very light. So it's all about jury selection. So how did the attorneys do in this case? Now remember, it's a case about white versus non-white. So the jury selection is very important. Well, the prosecution, of course, wants a white jury. What does they get? They got 5 white jurors, 5 Howleys. Everybody else on the jury was non-white. So already the defense is winning the case. But we go back to the evidence. The evidence is still key. You can convince any jury of something if you've got good evidence. I'm still wondering where Darrow is in all this. Why isn't he fighting for these underdogs? Why isn't he fighting for this group of Hawaiian men who are Chinese, Japanese, Hawaiian, mixed race Hawaiian? Why isn't he fighting for them? He's not even mentioned. Is he going to come into the trial later? I don't know. Evidence. The verdict. My father said you have to have evidence. So what was the evidence in this case? Was it good? Well, Talia took the stand. Talia's evidence was never good. She said she couldn't see things because of the dark, and then she identified them. She identified the men because they were just handed to her. She identified the car because the cops just showed it to her. She identified the license plate because they as much as told her what it was. Her testimony was very weird that way, but then she got on the stand and told a whole different story. She started messing with the timeline. Her timeline wasn't even consistent with the timeline from before. It was very confusing. Talia on the stand just added more confusion to the already weird testimony she'd given. The defense presented alibis for all 5 of the men for the entire evening, including the altercation with the Hawaiian woman, where they punched the Hawaiian woman. They had an alibi for every single part of the evening, with witnesses testifying to the veracity of those alibis. There was no way that they could have raped Talia because they were somewhere else in Honolulu at every moment of the evening. And then the defense produced 3 witnesses who at the time of the alleged rape saw Talia walking down the street with a white man. And they had obviously been arguing. And it looked like this white man might have hit her. 3 witnesses. Prosecution evidence. Tire tracks. The tire tracks of the car, Horace Ida's car, the car that was carrying the 5 guys, tire tracks at the scene of the rape. They found the tire tracks. But on cross-examination, the police officer who had found the tire tracks revealed that the night before he had driven the same car to the same place and driven it through the mud. And those were the tire tracks that he identified. Now, here's another thing that comes up. Objections. After I saw the movie Civil Action, I asked my father, well, there was a lot of objecting in that movie. My father said, yes, always object, always object, always object, because it throws off the rhythm of the other attorney's case. He loses his rhythm, always object. So going into this, The defense attorney, Heen, knew that the prosecution would object to everything he was going to bring up because he was going to question all the police officers on their evidence. He was going to challenge their evidence, and he knew that the prosecutor was going to object. But the first question he asked of a police officer was, so you withheld evidence. You withheld evidence that you found. You withheld it from not only me, but from the judge, the jury. You withheld evidence. And the police officer actually said yes before the prosecutor could object. He actually said yes. And then Heen was on a roll. He kept refuting everything that the police officers had done. He revealed that the prosecution had concealed evidence. It had falsified evidence. It had fabricated evidence. And not just the police officers, even the prosecutor, White, had falsified, concealed, and fabricated evidence. And every time he brought this stuff up, the prosecution would say, objection, but it was out there. Objection, but it was out there. Objection, but it was out there. And the judge kept saying, jury, I made a mistake. I shouldn't have let that question even be asked. I have sustained all of these objections. Ignore that evidence. Ignore that. Objection sustained. Objection sustained. Objection sustained. But the questions were asked, and the evidence was shown to be tainted. And once the jury had heard that, there was no taking it back. You can't tell the jury don't think about something that they're already thinking about. Clarence Darrow wrote about this. He said, you can't throw a skunk into the jury box and then tell it not to stink. Well, there were a lot of stinking skunks in the jury box now because Heen had revealed, at least through questions, at least through getting it out there, that the evidence was tainted. As a result, closing arguments, the prosecution has no evidence. Their evidence is all tainted. Everything Talia said is contradictory. It doesn't make sense. The timeline doesn't work. 3 people saw her with another man at the time of the alleged rape, another man who seemed to be arguing with her, another man who seemed to have beaten her himself. And all of the evidence that the police and the prosecutor had touched had somehow been tainted. They had no case. So what did the prosecutor do in his closing argument? He said, you must go with your emotion. He appealed to the emotions of the jury. This poor woman raped by these men. You must find them guilty. You must, because he had no evidence. The closing argument of the defense attorney, Heen, was all about facts. You have to go with the facts. You have to go with the facts. And the facts show you that all of this evidence is tainted and that people saw her with another man who clearly was the assailant, a white man. You have to go with the facts. Emotion or facts, prosecution or defense. That was the case. The jury went to the jury room to decide. All of a sudden, everybody outside the jury room heard fighting, they heard yelling, they heard screaming. The judge got a key. He broke into the jury room, and in the jury room, 2 jurors had taken off their shirts and were getting ready to fight. And the judge had just arrived before the bell dinged and the fight took off. He separated the men. He said, listen, you are here to decide a case, not to fight. You must give a verdict. Talk to each other. Talk to each other. Well, they talked to each other for 97 hours. Finally, the judge called the attorneys and all of the interested parties back into the courtroom because there was a verdict. The foreman for the jury stood up. He said, we are a hung jury. We cannot reach a verdict. The judge declared a mistrial. Admiral Sterling was outraged. He said, should our military personnel feel the need to take justice into their own hands, well, there's not much I can do about that. He as much as encouraged them to do it. There's supposed to be a lockdown. There's supposed to be no shore leave, but I guess word didn't get out fast enough because the sailors went ashore that night. There were riots, 8 major riots in Honolulu, all of them between Navy personnel, white and Hawaiians, non-white, huge riots, fights. The Navy was on a rampage. A sailor named Deacon Jones took a bunch of his buddies and they found Horace Ida, the driver and owner of that car that had the 5 alleged perpetrators in it. They found Horace Ida at a bar. They dragged him out of a bar. They took him up to Nu'uanu Pali, these huge cliffs, famous from 1795, when King Kamehameha won control of Oahu by pushing the enemy's army, 1,000 men, over the cliffs where they fell to their death. They took him up to that pali, to those cliffs, and they threatened to throw Horace Ida off the cliff if he didn't confess. They wanted a confession because there was going to be a second trial. And when the second trial came up, they wanted a confession from one of the perpetrators that he had done it. And Horace Ida said, I didn't do it. I never even saw Thalia Massie until they took us into her bedroom and she identified him. I don't know anything about it. And they beat him and beat him. And they were about to throw him off the cliff and they realized that they couldn't because there were too many witnesses. It was a lover's lane. There were people kissing, but they'd stopped kissing when they heard the beating. So Deacon Jones, that sailor who was head of this group, and the other sailors took Horace Ida down to a cane field and they beat him and demanded a confession. Did you do it? No, I didn't do it. They beat him. Did you do it? No, I didn't do it. They beat him. He would not confess. And finally they knocked him out with a rifle butt. He had not confessed. Grace Fortescue read about all this and she was inspired. Grace Fortescue, the mother of Thalia, was outraged by the mistrial, but she was inspired, but she read about what Deacon Jones had done. He tried to beat a confession out of one of the alleged perpetrators. So she had an idea. Interestingly enough, Admiral Sterling assigned somebody to protect her. He sent a sailor over to her house where she was living with her daughter, Thalia, and this sailor was there to protect her, to protect both of them, and his name was Deacon Jones, the same man who had beat Horace Ida. And the two of them talked, and they talked, and they talked, and they came up with a plan. They came up with a plan. They hatched a plan. They would abduct Joe. This was the guy who had punched the Hawaiian woman, one of the alleged perpetrators. They would abduct Joe Hawaii. They would abduct him when he went to see his parole officer. Every morning at 8 o'clock, he had to go see his parole officer because it was in between trials. He was out on bail, but he had to see his parole officer every morning. At 8 a.m., when he was at the courthouse, they would abduct him. How would they abduct him? They would serve him a phony summons. He didn't know Deacon Jones. He wouldn't recognize him. Deacon Jones, another sailor who would help them, whose name was Lord, these two would approach him. They would say, we have this summons for you. It's from Major Ross. You have to come see Major Ross. Now, Joe knew Major Ross because he was in the National Guard and Major Ross was his commander, so he would fall for it. Naturally, he would get in the car. They would then drive him to Thalia's house. They would then beat him, threaten him with a gun, and get a confession out of him. And once they had the confession, that would be used in the second trial to put these men away, these alleged perpetrators who Grace hated because she thought they were scum, brutes, animals. She would put them away with this evidence. The summons. They made a summons by cutting some headlines out of the newspaper. Then they pasted the headlines into what looked like a document. It looked like an official document. It had a seal on it from one of Tommy's certificates from a course he completed. And it said summons to appear, although it was misspelled. And it had this mumbo jumbo in it that nobody would have time to read, but it was very strange. This has been cut out of a newspaper. And this is one of the strangest things about the trial, because the thing that was cut out of the newspaper that was pasted in the summons for Joe, to trick Joe, said this: life is a mysterious and exciting affair, and anything can be a thrill if you know how to look for it and what to do with opportunity when it comes. It sounded like fate, a bizarre fate. Opportunity, Grace's opportunity, Tommy's opportunity. They presented the summons to Joe as he entered the courthouse. He didn't recognize these guys. They must be official. They were wearing suits. They managed to get him into the car. Then Grace got in the car. Then Tommy got in the car, disguised as a chauffeur, and they drove him to Thalia's house. And Joe knew something was wrong because he recognized Tommy as the driver. In spite of his disguise, they got him to Thalia's house. They took him inside and they threatened him. They threatened him. They beat him. They threatened him with a gun. They held a gun to his head and threatened him and beat him, demanding an explanation. They wanted a confession. They wanted a confession. They beat him. They beat him. They beat him. And then somebody shot him. One of the four shot him. They dragged his body into the bathroom, to the bathtub. They put his body in the bathtub and he bled to death. It took him 15 minutes. He bled to death in the bathtub. So now they had to get rid of the body. Tommy Massie, Grace Fortescue, mother of Talia Massie, Deacon Jones, and the Sailor Lord. They had to get rid of the body, so they put it into Grace's car. They drew the blinds, and they raced towards Cocoa Head, an obscure part of Oahu. They would dump the body at Cocoa Head, and they were racing across Oahu, but they were going too fast. They were speeding, and a police officer pulled them over because he thought the car was suspicious. Not only speeding, but the blinds were drawn. Why? He opened up the back door. Something was in a big package, and hanging out of the package was a leg. It was a body. The officer arrested all four of them. They were indicted. The grand jury determined that they would be charged with second-degree murder. Well, the country went crazy. The mainland went crazy. Everybody white in America went insane. Congress was furious. They were furious that these poor people were going to be indicted. They were going to be charged with second-degree murder of this scum, this alleged rapist, this not white person. The whites were losing. This was an honor killing, everybody said. It was an honor killing. It was their right to kill him. The papers were furious. Congress was furious. The Hearst paper, William Randolph Hearst's paper, said this is ridiculous. It is an honor killing. And it advised that the U.S. Navy take control of the Hawaiian Islands, declare martial law, and try the four living alleged perpetrators, try them in a court-martial, in a military court, and give them the death sentence. One newspaper said that it should be death by torture. People were outraged. So now there's another case. The case of Tommy, Grace, Jones, and Lord, trying them for the murder of Joe, the Hawaiian who allegedly had raped Thalia with the other four guys. A new case. Everyone was very upset. Hawaii couldn't solve the problem. They could not solve the problem, but there was a lot of money. And that money allowed the defendants to hire the best defense attorney in the country, Clarence Darrow. And I read this and I was in shock. Clarence Darrow was going to defend these awful people, Grace Fortescue, Tommy Massie, these racists who killed this innocent man? He was going to defend them? Why? Why would he take this case? I'm taking my jacket off now because Clarence Darrow was famous for his suspenders. He was always trying cases in hot places like the Deep South, like Hawaii. And so he's always taking his coat off. In his shirt sleeves, he would defend in his suspenders. That's how he was known, the attorney in the suspenders. So he was headed to Hawaii with his wife. Why did he take this case? Because it was 1931. In 1929, he had suffered egregiously in the stock market crash. He was broke. He needed the money. My hero was taking a case for no other reason than money? I was appalled. I didn't understand. It seemed like he was sacrificing all of his beliefs, all of his integrity. Unfortunately for Darrow, the opposition now had a much better attorney than White. The prosecution had a man named Kelly, and Kelly was talented. He was very talented. The prosecution was not going to screw up this time. There'd be a radio audience because the entire country wanted to see how this case was going to come out. Everybody, Congress, the president, everybody white in the United States wanted to see how this case was going to come out. So it'd be broadcast over the radio. And the jury selection this time did not go the way the first jury selection had gone. Darrow proved his talent. Again, a case about race. So what did he get? He got 7 white people on the jury, 7 Howleys, and there'd be 5 non-white people on this jury. So Darrow was already winning his case. He was getting the people on the jury that he would need. Remember, the first case had maybe gone the way it had gone because the defense had won jury selection. Well, now the prosecution was winning it, and the case was probably going to go Darrow's way if he had evidence, if he could come up with a good scheme for defending these 4 murderers. The first day of the trial, Darrow made his opening statement, and Joe's mother was in the courtroom, and she wept and wept and wept. She dominated attention. Darrow was frustrated. He said he wanted her out of the court. He asked the judge, can we please get this woman out of the court? Get her out of the court. She stayed. He wasn't happy with this woman in the court. Tommy took the stand. And only when he took the stand did Darrow reveal that it would be an insanity plea. Now, the defense attorney, Kelly, had asked Darrow before the case, what is your plea? What is your plea? And Darrow said, well, I'm not sure. I'm sure. And Kelly had said, you've used the insanity plea a lot, and said, I'm not going to use that in this case. Now, people are tired of that. They don't fall for that anymore. It was all a ruse. It was all a scam. Once he got Tommy into the stand, he revealed that that is exactly what he was going to do. He was going to show that Tommy was temporarily insane when he pulled the trigger. Additionally, Kelly didn't even know that the defendant would be Tommy. He didn't know which of the accused was going to be the one who Darrow said pulled the trigger until Tommy was in the stand. He said, oh, this is the one who pulled the trigger. Darrow was not telling the defense anything. The defense could not prepare a case. Darrow got Tommy into the stand, and Tommy said that the gun was only used to scare Joe. It was never meant to go off. The gun, the bullet, all that stuff was only used to scare Joe. And this is how Tommy portrayed the scaring of Joe. He said, I had a gun. I showed the gun to Joe. I said to Joe, did you do it? Joe said, no, I didn't do it. I loaded the gun. Joe saw me load the gun. I said, did you do it? Joe said, no, I didn't do it. I pointed the gun at Joe. I said, did you do it? Joe said, no, I didn't do it. I didn't. I moved towards him with the gun pointed at him. I pointed at his head. I said, did you do it? He said, no, I didn't do it. I cocked the gun. I said, did you do it? Did you do it? He said, no, I didn't do it. I put it to his head. I said, did you do it? Did you do it? Did you do it? And finally he said, yes, I did it. And then the gun went off. It just went off. I don't remember pulling the trigger. The second I heard him say, yes, I did it, it just went off. I never meant to shoot him. I have no recollection of pulling the trigger. I just know the gun went off. Darrow said it was a clear case of temporary insanity. He had never intended to shoot. The gun shot itself. Tommy could not be held responsible. All he did was a reflexive action to hearing, yes, I did it, to a confession. That's all it was, temporary insanity. Well, Kelly was Darrow's match as an attorney, and he remembered the objection rule. And he knew that Darrow would object faster than the previous attorney, than White. He knew he would object. He would never let an answer slip out from one of the witnesses. Never. But Kelly could still use the questions to get information to the jury. So Kelly, when he approached Tommy for cross-examination, he asked Tommy, are you proud of being a Southerner? Objection, sustained. Tommy, did you investigate the unwritten law as you prepared for this case? Objection, sustained. Tommy, did you feel you had to do this because of the vile rumors that were being leveled at you, that you beat Thalia, and that Thalia was probably with another man that night? Objection, sustained. Tommy, have you previously been involved in another kidnapping? Objection, sustained. I'll clarify. Did you ever kidnap a baby? Objection, sustained. But the information was out there. This information about Tommy. Now, what about the questions? What did the questions mean? Well, he said, are you proud of being from the South? Well, obviously that meant, are you proud of being a racist? He was basically saying, you're a racist because you're from the South. He asked about the unwritten law. Well, the unwritten law is the right of a man to defend his honor. If his wife has been dishonored, he can kill the man who dishonored him, the unwritten law. So he asked Tommy about that, because obviously that's what Tommy felt. He felt he was entitled to the unwritten law. Of course, the unwritten law is not a law, so it doesn't apply in court. He asked about the vile rumors because, of course, he wanted to get out there that the police had visited Tommy because Tommy did beat Thalia, and that there were a lot of rumors about Thalia, and that those people had seen Thalia with that white guy who seemed to have been arguing with her and might have beaten her. He asked if Tommy had been involved in a previous kidnapping of a baby. How strange. Well, in fact, one night a few years before, Tommy and Talia were leaving a movie theater and there was a baby on the sidewalk. There was no mother around. They picked up the baby. They started walking the baby to the police station, and a woman came running down the street. She said, "Give me my baby." They gave her the baby. She said, "Give me $5. I'll tell the police that you kidnapped my baby." That's what he was referring to, Kelly. And that might sound like dirty pool, but he was up against Darrow, who was going to try any trick in the book to get Tommy off. So Kelly was going to get all that information out there. Remember those stinking skunks? He had thrown a lot of stinking skunks into the jury. And the judge could say, sustained, objection sustained. Don't think about that, jury. Don't think about that. Don't think about it. But guess what? The jury was going to think about it. Kelly then showed Talia, who had become up on the stand. Before she did come up on the stand, though, Darrow produced some alienists. Now, alienists are basically psychiatrists, and he brought these alienists into the court to prove that Tommy was temporarily insane. Well, unfortunately, these psychiatrists talked too much. They gestured too much, and it was confusing. The jury couldn't follow, and Darrow tried to help them, but it just got more and more confusing. Their testimony was not helpful. It was too confusing, too technical, too complicated, too contradictory. Then he put Talia back on the stand, and Talia sobbed. She did exactly what Darrow wanted her to do. She sobbed and sobbed and sobbed, and soon the entire court was sobbing. Well, Kelly was having none of it. On cross-examination, he walked up to Talia, and he said, "Talia, I have a report here. It seems that you went and saw a psychologist just last year. And this is his report. In this report, he quotes you. He talks about how you feel about Tommy. Apparently you told him, and it's all in this report." Talia stopped crying. The tears melted away from her face. She became enraged. She grabbed that report, she tore it up, and she threw it down, and she said, "How dare you? How dare you? How dare you? That is a confidential report between a patient and a doctor. How dare you bring that into this courtroom? How dare you? How dare you?" And Kelly said, "Thank you, Talia. Thank you for showing us your true nature." Talia burst into tears. And nobody in the court knew what was in that report. They didn't know anything that was in that report. Nobody ever said. Kelly hadn't read it, and she destroyed it. Nobody knew anything that was in that report, but she was crying, and she left the stand. She wasn't even excused. She walked off of the stand. She walked right up to Tommy. She walked right over to Tommy, and she said to Tommy, "Oh, Tommy, what right does he have to say that I don't love you? Everybody knows that I love you, Tommy. I love you. What right does he have to say that I don't?" What right does he have to say? Nobody had said anything. So now we know what was in the psychological report. She told everybody by saying that to Tommy. And nobody knows if anything was written on that. Nobody even knows if that was a real psychological report. Nobody even knows if Kelly knew what was in it. Maybe he had just baited her, but he'd gotten exactly what he wanted from her. She had told a psychologist a year before she did not love her husband. Darrow, during one of his most famous cases, the Leopold and Loeb trial, had said, "I am pleading for a time when hatred and cruelty will not control the hearts of men, when we can learn by reason and by judgment and by understanding and faith that life is worth saving and that mercy is the highest attribute of man." Mercy. Mercy is the highest attribute of man. Now, of course, Leopold and Loeb had killed a 14-year-old just for the thrill of it, and they'd been found guilty. Darrow wasn't involved in that part of the case, but the part of the case he was involved in with Leopold and Loeb was the sentencing, and he was trying to spare their lives. He was trying to say that never should we take a life. Not even the US government should take a life. Yes, they're guilty, but we shouldn't execute them. Put them away in prison for life, but don't execute them, because we should never take a life. We'll just be doing what they did, kill somebody. And he convinced the jury, and they were not executed, and they were given life sentences. So here, in this case, Darrow Darrow seems to be saying that it's okay to kill, that Tommy and Grace Fortescue and Deacon Jones and Lord were justified in killing. He is refuting what he said in Leopold and Loeb. In Darrow's summation, he talked about the pressure that was on Tommy. Tommy was under so much pressure to prove that Thalia was innocent, pressure to save his honor. There was too much pressure on him. He had to do something. He had to also get rid of these slanders that were being leveled against him as a wife beater and Thalia as somebody who was sleeping around with other white naval officers. He had to get rid of those slanders. He had to get a confession. He had to prove that she was innocent, that she had been raped by these 5 guys. Darrow also talked about the devotion, the motherly devotion, the sanctity of motherhood personified by Grace Fortescue. Here is a model mother. She is a model mother. Here she is. And the only reason she was involved in this heinous crime is she wanted to protect her daughter. She was just saving her daughter's dignity, her daughter's honor. And then Darrow appealed to the human impulses of the jury. He said, you have to understand, these are natural human impulses that you feel. Put yourself in the position of Tommy, of Grace. Put yourself in their position. You would have done what they did, wouldn't you? They're not guilty. Temporary insanity, that fired the gun. But the rest of it, it's only stuff you would do to protect your honor, your wife's honor, your daughter's honor. You have to understand the reality of their human impulses. He appealed to their humanity. He also talked about the unwritten law. Of course, the unwritten law wasn't that you get to kill the man who has brought dishonor to your wife, but you can get a confession out of him. That was the unwritten law. Get a confession out of him. Obtain a confession. Kelly took the stand. His summation consisted of one thing, the law of Hawaii. We have to protect our law. If we let people come here and break our laws, everybody will come here just to break our laws. We have to defend our laws. He said the temporary insanity thing is hooey. It's nonsense. Temporary insanity? Okay, yeah, maybe temporary insanity for shooting the gun, but what about the next 15 minutes it took Joe to die? What did they do? They dragged him into the bathtub so he could bleed into the bathtub. He bled to death. 15 minutes. What about those 15 minutes? Were they temporarily insane for those 15 minutes? No, nobody ever said they were. Not the psychiatrists. Not Darrow. Nobody said that. These were naval officers. They were trained in first aid. Having realized this horrible thing that they had accidentally, through temporary insanity, shot Joe, why didn't they revive him? Why didn't they stop the bleeding? Temporary insanity. No, they wanted him dead. And they took 15 minutes making sure it happened. In Leopold and Loeb, Kelly pointed out, Darrow had said that killing is never justified. He said it is never justified. The state can't kill. Nobody can kill. Nobody has the right to kill. And now he's saying that killing's all right? That doesn't make any sense. Even Darrow must think that this is wrong. And the sanctity of motherhood, the defense attorney said, the sanctity of motherhood, we're supposed to respect Grace because she protected her daughter. Look at her. She's sitting there next to her daughter. Grace and Thalia are sitting next to each other. What about Joe's mother? Joe's mother is sitting in the courtroom too. There's no Joe next to her. Her son is dead, bled to death in a bathtub while 4 people watched. Which mother should we respect? Which should we feel for? The verdict. Remember, 7 whites, 5 non-whites. Grace Fortescue, guilty, manslaughter. Leniency recommended. The sailor Lord, guilty, manslaughter. Leniency recommended. The sailor Jones, Deacon Jones, guilty, manslaughter. Leniency recommended. Tommy Walsh, Lieutenant, United States Navy, guilty, manslaughter. Leniency recommended. A newspaper interviewed the 7 whites on the jury after the case. They said they did not buy the temporary insanity plea. They didn't buy it. They didn't believe it. They also didn't believe that Joe had confessed. They didn't think Joe was guilty, and they didn't think he confessed. Darrow had failed to win over even the white jurors. Admiral Sterling was furious, and he threatened that not only would his sailors run amok and there was nothing he could do about it, but that he would boycott all of the Honolulu businesses. They would bring Honolulu's economy into the dirt. They would not patronize the Hawaiian businesses. The judge was required by Hawaiian law to sentence all 4 of the convicted parties to 10 years hard labor. That's what the Hawaiian law demanded for a manslaughter. He sentenced them to 10 years of hard labor. Again, the US Congress went crazy. Everybody white in America was furious. The newspapers were screaming for a pardon. They couldn't believe this case had gone this way. They were outraged. They demanded a pardon. And Darrow was up against the wall because he needed to win this case. Because not only was he going to get the money from this case, but he needed to prove that he could win cases, any case. If he didn't win this case, even though he'd already lost it, if he didn't somehow win it, he would never get another case. So he went to the territorial governor, Lawrence Judd, and he begged, he pleaded, he cajoled, he threatened for a pardon. He said, what's US Congress going to do to you? What's the president going to do to you? What are the newspapers going to do to you? You must pardon these people. There will be riots. The territorial governor, Lawrence Judd, had the convicted killers brought to his office, and he commuted their sentences from 10 years of hard labor to 1 hour to be served in his office at that time. They sat there for 1 hour doing their sentence. And the governor served them crumpets and coffee for the hour. Then he went outside and he told the press. But he said the conviction stands. He would not pardon them. They would still be convicted felons, but he got them off the hook. They would not have to do any time, just that 1 hour with crumpets and coffee. Darrow had succeeded. He'd gotten them off the hook. 4 days later, the killers and Clarence Darrow boarded the USS Malolo and sailed for San Francisco. None of them ever returned to Hawaii again. What about the retrial? Remember, the first trial of the 5 alleged assailants had ended in a mistrial. What about the retrial? Well, the territorial government was very frustrated with the prosecution. So what they did was they hired the Pinkerton Detective Agency, an unbiased detective agency. They hired them to see if there was any evidence to prove that these 5 guys were responsible for any crime. The Pinkerton Detective Agency said no. The timeline was off. The evidence was all tainted. There was no proof that these guys had done anything. In 2006, there was a convention of attorneys in Hawaii, in Honolulu, and they decided at this convention to retry the notorious Massie case. A new trial. Theoretical, just for fun, just because people were fascinated, and it was a local story, and they determined that these guys were innocent. The 5 alleged assailants were innocent. There was no evidence, no proof. It didn't hold up. Darrow, in the process of getting these people off, had refuted his entire career. And I reached the end of this article. I was reading this article in the New Yorker. I was appalled. It seemed like everything that I had admired in him had been blown away in the dust. He'd always gone for the underdog, and here he was defending the hegemony, the superior people, the whites, the entitled people, the US Navy people. He believed in the sanctity of life, and here he was defending the murderers. He had always believed in the equality of races, and here he was defending people who thought the Hawaiians were brutes, thugs, savages. He had allied himself with the lowest form of race hate. I was so disillusioned. This case wasn't mentioned anywhere else. It's briefly mentioned in his autobiography, but very defensively and very quickly. It made me think a lot about having heroes, legal heroes. And then something came back to me when I read this. Something came back to me. When I saw the verdict, my mother and I went and saw the verdict. We saw it in the city at the Metro Theater, yeah, in San Francisco. And we both loved it. We loved it. And we were leaving the theater after the movie. And we were talking about the movie. We were so excited about it. And I was asking her, what do you think was the best part? What do you think is the biggest impact this movie is going to make? And she said, you know what I think is so important about this movie? Here's what I think is so important about this movie. It's going to show people how sleazy lawyers can be. It's going to show people how they'll do anything to win. I was like, what? What are you talking about? Frank Galvin's a hero. He's a hero. She was talking about the defense attorney, Frank Galvin's adversary, Ed Concannon. Ed Concannon had done every sleazy thing in the book. He said that I am not paid to do my best. I am paid to win. Consequently, there was discussion of jury tampering, bribing jurors. He got a woman to sleep with Frank Galvin so she could collect information on Frank Galvin's case and report it back to Ed Concannon, to the defense. He bought off the lead prosecution witness, the doctor, the star doctor who was going to testify. He was going to testify. He bought that guy off and sent him to the Bahamas where he was incommunicado. He destroyed Frank Galvin's case through tricks and manipulation. My mother said, this is great. Now people are going to see how attorneys win cases. And I was wondering, after she said that, I wondered, well, what did she mean? Was she saying that my father was Frank Galvin, the hero? Or was he Ed Concannon, the man who would do anything to win? What was she saying? Was my father Clarence Darrow before the Massie trial, the great beacon of liberal consciousness, of light, of wonderment, the man who could defend anybody, who was going to bring equality to the courts? Or was my father was he Clarence Darrow after the Massie trial, when he sold himself out? And then I wondered what the motivation was. Darrow had taken the case in 1931 because he was broke. And I wondered about that beautiful house, that gorgeous colonial house in redwood trees. And how did that get paid for? My mother's comment made me think anew. Clarence Darrow made me think anew. What had happened? What had happened in court? What had happened at my father's law firm? I'll never know. I never know. As an attorney, as a father, my father knew he'd never have to give evidence against himself. He'd taken the fifth. He never spoke a word to me about his work. Thank you for joining me for A Murder in Hawaii. You might be wondering what happened to these people. Well, Thalia and Tommy had left Hawaii, never to return, and they divorced soon after. Thalia was a suicide. She tried committing suicide all her life. She was a heavy drinker, she did drugs. In 1963, she managed to take her own life. Tommy was diagnosed as psychotic, and he was discharged from the Navy. He lived in San Diego for the rest of his life till 1987. Grace Fortescue inherited lots of money, and she took care of Thalia. She lived to 95. She learned how to water ski, to skydive, a lot of exciting things. And her daughter died very near her in her beautiful new home in Palm Beach. Years later, Deacon Jones said that he was the person who pulled the trigger, and that Darrow had decided that Tommy should take the fall because he didn't think that Grace should have to take the fall. Darrow thought that Grace was the one. But Deacon Jones said, no, I'm the one who pulled the trigger. This was based on readings I've done on this case. Of course, there's the wonderful article in the New Yorker by John Gregory Dunn, Pearl Harbor's Metaphor. There are some terrific books specifically about the case, a number of them. And of course, there are those wonderful old plays. Clarence Darrow for the Defense and Inherit the Wind. Thank you so much for joining me.